Biology Lecture 7, the Cardiovascular System. Like for the other system lectures, we're going to start off with talking about the anatomy of the cardiovascular system. In general, when you look at diagrams involving the cardiovascular system, oxygenated blood will usually be represented by the color red, and deoxygenated blood will be represented by the color blue. Now, before you freak out, let's just go through this very slowly. When we talk about the cardiovascular system, we have to talk about how blood flows and the pathway it takes. Starting first with the right atrium. On this diagram, the right atrium is listed right here. Blood travels through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, it travels up through the pulmonary valve and into the pulmonary artery, which goes to the lungs. After it's gone to the lungs and gotten oxygenated, it travels back through and goes into the left atrium. After it goes into the left atrium, it goes through the mitral valve into the left ventricle, which then goes up to the aortic valve, into the aorta, and out to the arteries. While it's out in the arteries, it'll go through arterioles, which are slightly smaller arteries, and eventually go into the capillaries, where the gas exchange occurs with the tissues. Then it goes into the venules, to the veins, and then finally back into the vena cava, and then right into the atrium. And this loops again and again and again. The electric signal flow is constituted simply as SA node to AV node to the bundle of His to the Purkinje fibers. This is a gross oversimplification, but for the intents of the MCAT, this is as far as you need to go. For anyone who knows somebody with a pacemaker, that pacemaker is helping to regulate the electrical signal. During a contraction of the heart, you'll notice that there is a lub-dub. This is systole and diastole. The first sound you hear is the heart contracting, the ventricles in particular. This pushes blood out. And the second sound is the heart relaxing and blood flowing back in. The vasculature is comprised of three components, starting first with arteries. Arteries are highly muscular, and this allows for recoil and faster blood flow. Anytime you see the word artery, note that it's taking blood away from the heart. Capillaries are the intermediates between arteries and veins. They have incredibly thin cell walls to allow for diffusion, and this is where gas and solute exchange occurs. Veins are inelastic and thin-walled structures that carry blood to the heart. Because they are inelastic and have thin walls, and generally may have to go against gravity, they have valves to maintain a one-way flow. Obviously, if it did not go in just one direction, you'd have some very disastrous consequences. A portal system is when blood passes through two capillary beds in series, and there's three that you'll see on the MCAT. The hepatic portal system is when blood travels from the gut capillary beds to the liver capillary beds through the hepatic portal vein. The hypophyseal portal system is when it travels from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary in the brain. And the renal portal system is when blood travels from the glomerulus to the vasa recta in the filtration system of the kidneys. So we've gone into the heart and its anatomy. Now we're going to talk about what it's pumping, blood. Blood is comprised of several components: assorted salts, solutes, water, red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. We'll talk about red blood cells first, or as they are scientifically called, erythrocytes. Remember that erythrocytes do not have nuclei, organelles, or mitochondria. This is so that they can make room for the heme group, which is going to carry oxygen. This is commonly measured to monitor circulatory health. Usually, if they have a healthy amount of red blood cells, their blood oxygen should be at good levels. If it's low, that probably means that they have low oxygen. When you take a hematocrit, this is what you're measuring. Leukocytes, or white blood cells, are formed in the bone marrow. These are crucial for immune functions. Types of leukocytes are listed to the right. Don't worry too much about the exact functions of these currently. We'll go into the immune system in a later lecture. There are two types of immunities. Nonspecific immunities are general immunities that are not specified for specific pathogens, whereas specific immunities are targeted. There is a cell memory associated with specific immunity. But again, when it comes to the immune system, we're going to go into more detail later on. Thrombocytes are commonly called platelets. These are cell fragments that are required for coagulation. Coagulation is the result of an activation cascade that is due to damage to the endothelial lining of a blood vessel. This triggers the collagen and tissue factors to form a clot because of the exposure of these layers. The abnormal exposure is going to cause the platelets to bind to this collagen and stabilize with fibrin. And finally, the clot is broken down by plasmin once the healing process is completed. Blood antigens are based on the external proteins on blood cells. Surface antigens A, B, and O are listed. Remember that there could be A, B, AB, and O being the absence of these antigens, and Rh factor being positive or negative. A combination of these factors is going to dictate blood type. When you're trying to match somebody for a blood transfusion, this is one of the criteria you look for. We've talked about the anatomy. Now let's go to the second portion, the physiology. Blood pressure is the force per unit area exerted on the walls of blood vessels by the blood inside. It has to be high enough to overcome the resistance by arterioles and capillaries. Think about pushing it through a very, very thin tube. It has to have enough pressure to go through this tube, otherwise it's going to get backed up, and the gas exchange necessary is not going to occur. However, it has to be low enough to prevent damaging these vasculatures as well. Damage to this will cause leaks and substantial harm to your body. Also, extremely high blood pressure is going to create some sort of endocrine response. If it's too low, it's going to promote aldosterone and ADH release to stimulate water reuptake, which is going to subsequently increase your blood pressure. A high blood pressure is going to promote ANP release in the atria. If you remember from the endocrine lecture, you're going to know that ANP is going to try to decrease the blood pressure. The hydrostatic pressure is the pressure of the fluid within the blood vessel, whereas the osmotic pressure is the pressure derived from the sucking pressure drawing water towards the solutes. A combination of these two pressures is going to dictate what your blood pressure is. This is a common metric that physicians will use when measuring overall health during physicals when looking at patients. Lastly, gas exchange. The circulatory system is responsible for gas and solute exchange. Gas exchange is carried out by cooperative binding of heme groups. There's going to be 4 of these, and as each heme group binds, it's going to increase the affinity of the others, creating a cascade. The solute exchange is when blood carries nutrients or waste through the body to specified locations. Think of the blood as a sort of highway for these resources to go to and from where they need to. That'll conclude our lecture involving the cardiovascular system. Please join us in the next lecture as we talk about the immune system.